You treated me like I was just part of the plan, Kellen. But I'm not your surrogate, and I'm not your project. The storm outside had been steady for hours, hissing against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Manhattan penthouse. Thunder cracked in the distance, low and deliberate, as if echoing the fury building inside her chest. Leora stood barefoot on the marble floor, trembling, but not from fear. Her curls were damp from the mist she'd walked through earlier, defying the cold that had always filled this place. Now it wasn't just the air that felt icy. It was him. Kellen Vance, billionaire CEO, stood across from her in a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled up, bourbon glass loose in his grip. He wasn't the type to lose control. Not in the boardroom, not in bed, not even now. But the way his jaw clenched, the way his brows pinched together, said he wasn't expecting her to speak like that, to challenge him. Her voice was calm, but every word sliced through the silence like shattered glass. You treated me like I was just part of the plan, Kellen. But I'm not your surrogate, and I'm not your project. He blinked once. No sharp retort, no denial, just silence. The lightning flashed behind her, casting sharp light across his chiseled face. The thunder that followed only made the quiet between them louder. I cooked your meals, cleaned your space, stayed silent while you made decisions about everything, including the baby you planned to have, like I was just another convenient piece on your blueprint, she said, her voice breaking. But you never asked what I wanted. He took a step forward, slow. You think I used you? I know you did. The bourbon touched the table with a dull clink as he set it down. His throat moved with a hard swallow. Then tell me what you want, Leora. She didn't move, just stared at him through wet lashes, her heart hammering against her ribs. To matter, Kellen. And for the first time since she stepped into his world, he had no response. No formula, no defense, no plan. Just rain tapping the windows and the weight of truth between them. If you've ever felt underestimated or unseen, you'll relate to this. Like, comment and tell us. What does it mean to finally matter? The letter of eviction crumpled in Leora's fist as she stood outside the steel and glass skyscraper that housed Vance Technologies. The rain hadn't let up since morning, and her sneakers were soaked through, toes numb from the cold. She'd never imagined her life would lead her here, jobless, displaced, and now at the mercy of someone she didn't even know. Xavier had said it, like he was offering her a favor. Just go, he insisted over the phone. You don't have to stay if it's uncomfortable. But my brother's place, it's safe. And he needs someone he can trust. Trust. She almost laughed at the word. A week ago, she had been working full-time at a wellness spa in Harlem. When it shut down with no notice, she'd lost everything. Her income, her room in the staff housing, and her carefully built stability. With no family nearby and too much pride to ask old friends for help, she'd couch-surfed until even that ran out. So when Xavier offered the referral, her hesitation wasn't about the job. It was about the man behind it. Just meet him, he'd said. He's all logic and systems. But if I'm being honest, he could use someone who doesn't care about his name or his bank balance. So she came. The security guard at the front desk gave her a tight nod and scanned her ID before directing her upstairs. The private elevator ride was silent, except for her heartbeat, which thudded louder the higher she ascended. When the elevator doors opened directly into the penthouse, her breath caught. It was cold, beautiful, but cold. Clean lines, white walls, gray marble. The air smelled like expensive nothing. And there he was, Kellen Vance. Standing by the massive floor-to-ceiling window, he didn't turn when she stepped in. Didn't greet her. Just said, "You're early." His voice was flat. Not cruel, but detached. Calculated. "I took the train," she replied, already aware of how out of place her thrift coat and wet shoes looked on the polished floor. He finally faced her, expression unreadable. "Xavier says you're reliable." She lifted her chin. "I am." He nodded once, slow, then walked past her without another word. This wasn't an interview. It was an assessment, and she had no idea what she'd just walked into. Leora didn't unpack for the first 3 days. The bedroom she'd been shown, bare, white, spotless, felt less like a place to rest and more like a sterile waiting room. She placed her duffel bag on the chair in the corner and left it zipped. A toothbrush, a charger, and 2 changes of clothes were all she allowed herself to touch. Each morning, she woke early, tiptoeing across marble floors and hoping not to be noticed. Kellen never acknowledged her presence beyond the occasional passing glance. Instructions were delivered through the house manager via email, always concise, always cold. At first, she wondered if he even remembered her name. But necessity is louder than discomfort. She had no savings, no backup plan. And despite how strange it felt to exist silently inside someone else's world, it was safer than the shelters, warmer than sleeping on Xavier's couch, and quieter than the constant worry that used to fill her days. Still, she resisted. She didn't linger in rooms where he worked. She kept conversations brief when the housekeeper showed her routines. She avoided eye contact with the silent driver who arrived every Thursday for grocery pickups. It was easier that way, staying invisible in a place where she'd never truly belonged. But even as she tried to vanish, the penthouse reminded her of everything she had lost. The fridge was stocked with ingredients she once splurged on for dinner parties she could no longer host. The guest bathroom had more luxury than the apartment she'd once shared with 2 roommates. And the silence. The silence was the loudest thing of all. Still, every time she considered quitting, the thought would rise up like a wave and crash just as hard. Where would you go? So she stayed, waking up each day to clean, organize, take stock of deliveries. She folded Kellen's dress shirts with precision, arranged files on the kitchen counter exactly as his assistant requested, learned which shelves he never touched and which blinds he preferred drawn open. And each evening, after the day's duties were complete, she returned to that guest room, still zipped up inside her duffel bag, still half-packed with hesitation, because while the job paid well and the room was warm, nothing about it felt like hers. Not yet. Kellen Vance didn't speak unless he had to, and when he did, every syllable felt like it had been filtered through a spreadsheet, precise, functional, stripped of any warmth. The first time they crossed paths after she officially started, he didn't even look up from his laptop. He was seated at the long black dining table, tablet in one hand, earbuds in, typing furiously with the other. Leora had just finished setting the glass down for his water. "You left a fingerprint on the rim," he said flatly, eyes never leaving the screen. She paused. "Excuse me?" He tapped the tablet once and finally glanced up. "Detail matters here. Don't place anything you wouldn't be willing to correct." That was the tone he used, like she was a faulty program that needed debugging. Leora nodded once, silent, then returned to the kitchen. Inside, her hands shook, not from shame, but frustration. She'd worked under demanding people before, but Kellen was different. He didn't yell. He didn't patronize. He didn't even raise his voice. He simply dismissed you, as if you were already gone. Throughout the week, it became clear he lived by structure alone. Breakfast, poached eggs, green tea, Greek yogurt. Lunch, delivered at exactly 1 p.m. Dinner, usually skipped. His closet was color-coded. His watch collection rotated weekly. Even the art on the walls, if it could be called that, was all monochrome, abstract, and emotionless. He wasn't cruel, just clinical, mechanical. When the orchid on the coffee table began to wilt, Leora asked if she should replace it. He barely looked up. It serves its purpose, which is a placeholder. That was Kellen. Every item in his home had a function, every person a role, and she was just another line item on his domestic ledger. But what struck her wasn't just the way he managed the space. It was the way he managed himself. No music ever played. No laughter ever slipped from any corner. Not a single framed photo anywhere. He existed in that penthouse the way a ghost might haunt an office building. Visible, successful, but utterly unreachable. And she had no idea what could crack a man that sealed. The penthouse sat above Manhattan like it didn't belong to the city at all. From the 65th floor, the noise of honking taxis, shouting pedestrians, and rolling delivery carts didn't exist. Below, New York pulsed with chaos and life. But up here, it was silence, sterile and commanding. No clutter, no softness, just glass, steel, stone, and shadow. The living room alone could hold a studio apartment. Its high ceilings were lined with recessed lighting that cast a clean white glow, never too warm. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped the entire eastern wall, giving a sweeping view of the skyline that stretched to the East River. Sunlight never lingered long. The blinds were programmed to adjust according to the time of day. The furniture was gray and angular, low-profile Italian leather with sharp edges and polished chrome bases. Nothing invited comfort. Everything demanded distance. Even the air felt controlled. The kitchen was state-of-the-art but barely used. Appliances were hidden behind matte black panels. The counters gleamed, untouched except for the precisely placed fruit bowl that never changed. 3 green apples. No more, no less. She once tried to rearrange them and came back the next day to find them returned to their original triangular formation. The hallway leading to the bedrooms was lined with soft sensor lights that flicked on as one walked past. The master bedroom door remained closed, always. The guest suite where Leora stayed was minimal. Queen bed, dark dresser, a small writing desk by the window. No art, no books, no clutter. It reminded her of a hotel room prepared for someone who might cancel last minute. The walls throughout the home were pale gray, bordering on white. The floors were heated stone. There were no rugs, no curtains, not a single personal touch, not even a faint scent. It was as if the space refused to be lived in. The only sign that a human occupied the place was the faint indentation on the couch where Kellen sometimes sat with his tablet late at night. Even then, he left no trace. Leora often wondered, did he design the space to feel like a fortress? Or had he simply learned to live where emotion didn't follow? Because if these walls could talk, they wouldn't whisper secrets. They'd stay silent, just like him. She didn't try to impress him, and maybe that's what got under his skin. Kellen was used to employees who moved like they were waiting for his approval, eager to please, quick to flatter, silently terrified of doing something wrong. But Leora didn't flinch under his gaze. She didn't make unnecessary conversation. And when he corrected her, whether it was how the kitchen towels were folded or the temperature of his green tea, she just met his eyes, nodded once, and adjusted without apology. It unsettled him. The first time he noticed her strength wasn't when she spoke. It was when she didn't. One morning, she was wiping down the marble countertop when he entered the kitchen, reviewing a quarterly report on his tablet. He glanced up to find her reading the label on his supplement bottle. "You don't take this," she said plainly. He didn't look up. "Excuse me?" She held up the unopened bottle. "It's been here since the day I arrived. You have too. Same expiration dates, still sealed." He finally looked at her, brows lifting. "You track that?" "I notice things," she replied, then placed the bottle back and continued wiping without another word. He watched her longer than he intended. She was calm, deliberate, not seeking validation, just aware, present. Later that week, when he returned from a strategy session, he found his study window open. The air inside was cooler, cleaner. There was a faint scent of lavender, not from any diffuser, but from a small sachet she'd placed discreetly on the bookshelf. He knew it was her. He knew without asking. And yet, when he saw her placing fresh towels in the guest bathroom that evening, he said nothing. Just stood at the hallway corner, watching her work with quiet precision. She didn't notice him. Or maybe she did and didn't care. Either way, she didn't look up. That irritated him. The fact that her presence didn't beg for attention but still managed to pull his focus. The fact that she spoke only when necessary but left him with questions anyway. She was everything he didn't expect in his ordered world. Soft without being weak. Firm without being loud. He couldn't decide if she was an asset or a disruption. But one thing was certain, Leora wasn't just another hire. She was becoming harder to ignore. In the glass-walled conference room overlooking Lower Manhattan, Kellen stood alone after the others had left. The screen still glowed faintly from the final slide of his presentation. Vance Legacy, 5-year strategy roadmap. It was a blueprint for control. Expansion into Southeast Asia. Strategic acquisitions across biotech and clean energy. Institutional partnerships with Ivy League research hubs. And nestled between those bullet points, buried under layers of financial jargon, sat one slide labeled simply, personal stability. He never elaborated on that part. Not to the board, not to Xavier, not even to himself, really. But it was there, marked and scheduled just like everything else in his life. A family, not built through unpredictability or chance, but engineered with clarity. The plan was simple: select a surrogate, choose an anonymous egg donor, hire a full-time caretaker for the child, and maintain legal custody through tight contractual terms. No complications, no messy emotional ties, no one with the power to derail his empire with feelings. It wasn't cruel. It was efficient, sensible, predictable. He'd even outlined a timeline for it in his private files. Clinical appointments in third quarter, surrogate implantation by Q4, birth projected mid-next year. The child would inherit a name, not affection, and affection was never part of the plan. Xavier had scoffed when he learned the details. "You're going to be a father, Kellen, not a venture capitalist. You don't build children like software." But Kellen dismissed the sentiment. Love had a cost, attachment had a shelf life, and feelings were liabilities. That's why, when Leora entered his life, he never considered her a variable. She was temporary, a quiet solution to his domestic needs, nothing more. Until she started watering the orchid he forgot he owned, until he heard her humming near the windows, until her presence disrupted the stillness he once thought he needed. He didn't know it yet, but she was already cracking his structure, and for the first time in years, he couldn't quantify the risk. He only knew this: if Leora had entered his life 6 months earlier, she would have been replaced. If she'd entered 6 months later, he would have been too far gone to notice her. But right now, she was colliding with his blueprint like a quiet storm, and he hadn't built a contingency for that. The change didn't come with fireworks or declarations. It came in silences, the kind that stretched longer than they used to, filled with unspoken glances and subtle shifts in breath. It began on a Wednesday. Leora had just finished arranging the fresh linens when she passed him in the hallway. He didn't speak as usual, but this time he paused. For a second, too long, long enough that she looked back. His eyes flicked toward her hand. The towel she held was cream, not the standard white he preferred. "You changed the linen color," he said, not accusing, but noticing. She met his eyes. White shows everything. He didn't reply, but he didn't correct her either. Another time, she caught him standing in the doorway of the guest room while she was cleaning. He didn't enter, didn't say anything, just stood there watching her arrange the books on the shelf in descending height order. It was something he usually did himself. "You alphabetize them," he said eventually. "Only when they're yours," she said, not looking up. He left before she could see his face. The atmosphere in the penthouse began to shift, degree by degree. He no longer stayed buried in his study when she passed through. Sometimes she found his eyes on her during breakfast prep. Other times, she walked into the room to find her favorite playlist still quietly looping. From the smart speaker, something she knew he'd heard days before while she was cleaning. And one night, he adjusted the thermostat, 2 degrees warmer. It wasn't obvious. If someone had walked in off the street, they would have sworn the place was as icy as ever. But Leora felt it. The stillness between them had changed. It wasn't hostile. It wasn't even awkward. It was charged. A new kind of quiet lingered in the air, heavy with things unsaid. And in the space between footsteps and whispered goodnights, something unspoken began to root itself. Neither of them acknowledged it aloud, but they both knew. The silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It was waiting. The following night, sleep evaded her again. The rain had returned, tapping steadily against the glass. The city lights blurred into streaks through the window pane, and somewhere across the penthouse, she could hear the faint hum of Kellen's study door sliding open. She tried to ignore it, pulling the blanket tighter around herself, but her heart wouldn't settle. Every time she closed her eyes, her mind wandered back to his voice from the night before, the tone that had softened, the look that had held her a moment too long. When she finally gave up trying to rest, she found herself drifting once more toward the kitchen. This time, she didn't bother turning on the lights. The glow from the city outside was enough. She poured water into the kettle, listening to it hiss as it heated. Then she heard footsteps behind her. "You again," he murmured. She turned slightly, catching his reflection in the glass of the microwave. His hair was messy, his tie loosened, sleeves rolled halfway up. He looked nothing like the man the press described. No headlines, no polished arrogance, just exhaustion. "You don't sleep," he said quietly, leaning against the counter. "Neither do you," she replied. He tilted his head. "Why's that?" She took a slow breath. "Because of you." The words slipped out before she could soften them. He blinked, surprised, but she didn't retract them. "You have this way of filling every space you walk into," she said. "Even when you're silent, you make noise. Your presence lingers, and I can't seem to shut it out." Kellen's gaze locked on hers, searching. "You're blaming your insomnia on me?" She shook her head, almost smiling. "I'm saying you're hard to forget, and that's a problem when I'm supposed to be invisible here." He didn't know what to say. For once, the man of strategy had no formula for the moment. The silence stretched, heavier than before, but not cold. Leora turned off the kettle before it whistled, her hands trembling slightly as she poured the water into her cup. She could feel him watching her, his stare tracing every small motion she made, as if memorizing it. "You shouldn't be afraid of being seen," he finally said, voice softer now. She looked over her shoulder. "Then stop pretending you don't see me." Their eyes met again, and that fragile distance between them began to fracture. Neither spoke after that, but the air carried something charged, something that promised this strange silence wouldn't stay quiet much longer. The shift between them didn't happen in a single night, but in fragments, small, unfinished, conversations that slowly exposed pieces of who they were beneath the roles they played. One Thursday evening, the city outside was soaked in rain again, and the penthouse felt dimmer than usual. Kellen emerged from his study, just as Leora was finishing up reorganizing the bookshelves. She didn't expect him to say anything. He usually didn't, but tonight, he lingered. He walked toward the window, hands in his pockets, then glanced back at her. "Do you ever feel like you're just waiting for someone to give you permission to exist?" The question caught her off guard. She straightened, unsure whether to answer, unsure if he was even talking to her, or just thinking aloud. "I used to," she said carefully. "When I was younger." He turned slightly, enough to see her but not enough to make it feel like a spotlight. "I moved through 6 homes before I was 16, she continued. "Some were decent, some not. But none of them made room for me. Not really. I learned early that if you're quiet, they forget you're there. Sometimes that was safer." Kellen's expression didn't change, but his body shifted, the tension in his shoulders loosening ever so slightly. "Did you ever go back?" he asked. She shook her head. Back to what? There was nothing to return to. He looked down at the floor for a long moment. "My mother left when I was 7. Walked out during a board meeting my father insisted I sit in on. I remember the sound of her heels as she crossed the marble. Everyone kept talking about projections and growth, but I couldn't hear anything after the elevator doors closed behind her." Leora swallowed, surprised by how openly he'd shared that. He rarely talked about his past, if at all. "She ever come back?" she asked. "No," he said simply. "But the silence she left?" That stayed. The room felt heavier after that, but it wasn't the suffocating kind. It was the weight of 2 people standing still long enough for their scars to show. "I think that's why I like order," he added, voice quieter now. "It's the only thing that doesn't leave." Leora stepped closer, arms folded gently over her chest. Sometimes control is just fear wearing a suit. Kellen looked at her sharply, like the words hit somewhere too real. She didn't flinch, didn't look away, and for the first time, he saw not just the woman Xavier had sent, not just the help, but someone who understood what it meant to be abandoned and still keep going, someone who knew how to survive without needing to explain how. The storm outside had calmed to a light drizzle, the kind that barely made a sound against the glass. Inside the penthouse, the air was still. Leora sat on the floor of the living room, her back against the base of the couch, cradling a warm mug in both hands. Kellen sat opposite her, legs stretched out, his tie discarded on the armrest, the top 2 buttons of his shirt undone. They hadn't planned to talk. It just happened. It's funny, Leora said, stirring her tea without looking up. How quiet this place is. Almost like it's afraid of people. Kellen arched a brow. Afraid? She met his eyes. You've built a life that keeps people out. I've lived in places where silence meant something bad was coming. But this silence? She paused. It's empty, polished. Like even your walls are afraid to breathe too loud. He exhaled slowly, not out of annoyance, but thought. I don't like mess. Or emotion, she added gently. He chuckled under his breath. Is that a diagnosis? No, she replied. It's just an observation. Kellen leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. And what do you want? To work for someone more expressive? I didn't want this job, she said plainly. I didn't want to live here. I didn't want to need help. But life doesn't ask what you're ready for. It just hands it to you. So I showed up. And now, I'm just trying to remember how to exist without disappearing. The words hung in the air between them. Neither rushed to fill the pause. He looked at her closely. You really went through 6 homes? She nodded. 4 foster homes, 2 group homes. Then I aged out, worked wherever I could, lived wherever someone didn't lock the door behind me. And you never broke? I bent. A lot. But no one ever taught me how to break safely. Kellen stared at her for a moment, then asked something no one ever had. What do you want for yourself, Leora? She blinked, caught off guard by the question. I'm still figuring that out. You shouldn't have to figure it out alone. That silence returned again. But now it was different. Intimate. Braver. She set her mug down. What about you? What do you want? His throat moved. I've always wanted control, power, stability. But lately, I'm not sure if that's enough. Their eyes held, and in that moment, Leora saw it. The man behind the empire, the boy behind the title. The cracks were there, small, subtle, but they were starting to show, and she didn't look away. The rain had returned with more force by Friday night, sleek ribbons sliding down, the balcony glass, distorting the skyline into soft shapes and streaks of light. The air outside was damp and heavy, but not bitter. And for once, Kellen had left the sliding door cracked open, letting the soft scent of petrichor drift into the living room. Leora sat cross-legged on the plush floor rug, unpacking takeout boxes from the paper bag the driver had left at the door. Thai, this time. She'd ordered enough for 2. She wasn't sure why. Kellen walked in from the hallway, sleeves rolled up, barefoot, a record playing faintly behind him. Jazz. Something warm and low. A saxophone swimming lazily through a melody that suited the weather. He didn't question the food or the setting, just lowered himself to the floor beside her, like it was the most natural thing in the world. She handed him chopsticks without speaking. He took them, brushing her fingers, and neither of them pulled away immediately. The balcony's open, she said, gesturing with her head. I noticed, he murmured. I like the sound of rain, she added. So do I. They ate in silence for a few minutes, the occasional hum from the vinyl spinning in the background adding texture to the room. The city felt far away, like it had taken a deep breath, and paused for them. Kellen finally leaned back on one arm, looking at her. I never do this. Eat Thai? He huffed a small laugh. Sit on the floor. Listen to music without a reason. Share space. Leora smiled faintly, wiping sauce from her fingers with a napkin. There's a first time for everything. He looked at her for a long time after that, not scanning her like a resume, not cataloging flaws or potential, just looking, as if trying to understand how a woman like her could move through his rigid world and not demand anything but air and space to breathe. You make this place feel less hollow, he said, almost a whisper. Leora set her food aside. You're not hollow. You're just scared to fill the wrong spaces. The jazz faded into a slower tune, something mournful but comforting. Outside, lightning blinked in the clouds, but the thunder stayed distant. He glanced at the door. You ever sit out there? Sometimes, she said, when I want to remember that I'm still part of the world. Without a word, Kellen stood and walked to the balcony. He opened it wider, then turned back to her with a single nod. She joined him, and for the first time since she arrived, the silence between them wasn't just waiting. It was listening. The next morning, Kellen sat at the end of the long dining table, eyes fixed on his tablet. Screen, but he hadn't turned a single page of the financial report in 10 minutes. His coffee sat untouched. Across the apartment, he could hear the faint sound of Leora humming to herself. As she arranged the fresh delivery of towels in the guest bathroom, he didn't know why he was listening for her. He just was. She'd only been here a few weeks, but the stillness of his space had changed. Before her, silence meant control. No noise, no distraction, no emotional debris. But now, silence was different. When she wasn't in the room, it felt incomplete. He hated how aware he was of her presence, of her scent lingering after she passed, of how she always paused to water the orchid he had long forgotten, or how she left his tea steaming exactly 3 minutes before setting it on the coaster. He told himself it was curiosity, nothing more, but the curiosity was becoming inconvenient. He found himself wanting to ask questions that had nothing to do with her work. What kind of music she played when no one was around, what book she had dog-eared in her drawer, why she never wore shoes in the kitchen at night. But every time the thought surfaced, he forced it back down, because wanting to know meant caring. And caring, that required vulnerability. He didn't trust that word. That evening, he passed her in the hall and opened his mouth to say something. Instead, he simply nodded and kept walking. Inside his study, he stood at the desk for a long time, tablet in hand, but his eyes weren't on the screen. He could still hear her humming. Later that night, he poured himself a glass of water and found her tea mug drying beside the sink. Her fingerprints still fogged the glass. He stared at it too long, feeling something coil in his chest, something unfamiliar, something unwelcome. He set the mug back down carefully, then returned to his room and closed the door with more force than necessary. On the other side of the penthouse, Leora sat on her bed, staring at the ceiling. She had heard his footsteps pause in the hall, heard him hesitate, and though he never said a word, she felt the weight of what he couldn't bring himself to ask. The space between them was still wide, but it was closing. Have you ever fallen for someone without realizing it? Drop A or in the comments if you have. Your story might just help someone else find clarity. Thunder rumbled through the clouds like distant drums, and the city beyond the glass faded into a moody haze. Inside the penthouse, only the flickering candlelight cast shadows across the space, warm, golden, and for the first time, alive. Kellen wandered back from the kitchen after failing to get the generator working. He paused just before stepping into the living room, drawn by a soft rustle and the delicate scent of something floral, jasmine maybe. That's when he saw her. Leora was curled on the floor, propped up by a low cushion, legs folded. Beneath her, her face turned toward a paperback resting on her thighs. A silk robe clung to her skin, ivory in color, catching the glow of the candles like moonlight on satin. It slipped off one shoulder slightly, exposing the curve of her collarbone and the hint of the smooth skin beneath. She didn't notice him at first. Her attention was deep in the page, eyes slowly scanning, lips faintly parted in concentration. Kellen had never seen her like this, not in this stillness, not in this kind of peace. And yet, there was nothing passive about her. She owned the room without trying, her quiet presence pressing against him like gravity. He cleared his throat gently. Her eyes lifted. "Kellen," she said, voice soft. "You read when the power goes out?" "I read when I need to remember who I am," she answered, marking the page with her finger. "The dark just gave me an excuse." He stepped closer, drawn by something he couldn't name. "What are you reading?" "A book I've read 100 times, one where the woman saves herself." He smiled faintly, sitting a few feet away from her on the floor. "That sounds like you. You don't know me," she said, but her voice didn't hold accusation. It held invitation. "Maybe I want to." The rain tapped against the windows like fingertips. A candle flickered between them. She studied him in silence, eyes flickering over the man who always wore control, like armor, now dimmed in shadows, vulnerable in ways he probably didn't realize. "You're not what I expected," she whispered. "And what did you expect?" "Steel. coldness. "A man I'd have to avoid," she said. "And you are all of that. But also—" He waited. "You're human. And that might be scarier." He didn't answer. He just looked at her. Really looked. The kind of look that pulled breath from the room. And somewhere between the warmth of the candlelight and the hush of the storm, something inside both of them gave way. Kellen didn't know what pulled him closer, the quiet or her courage. She didn't move when he shifted nearer, didn't flinch when the faint light reached across her face, gilding her in gold. The robe shimmered as she breathed, one knee drawn up, her pulse visible in the hollow of her throat. "Do you ever stop thinking?" she asked suddenly, her voice low. He blinked, caught off guard. "Thinking keeps me alive." "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "It keeps you from living." The words hit harder than she intended, but she didn't apologize. She looked up at him then, her eyes wide, soft, and brimming with something he hadn't seen in anyone for a long time. Truth. Kellen's breath came slower. "You think you know what I need, Leora?" "I don't have to guess," she murmured. "I can feel it." He leaned forward before he could stop himself. The candle between them flickered, as if sensing the shift in air. His hand reached for her face, hesitated for a heartbeat, then brushed the edge of her jaw. Her skin was warm, delicate beneath his fingers. She didn't move away. "You shouldn't look at me like that," he whispered. "How should I look at you? Like you see past everything." Her lips parted slightly. "Maybe I do." That was all it took. The space between them vanished. His mouth met hers in a kiss that was slow, trembling, and far too real. Not a kiss of dominance or hunger. This was recognition. Years of repression giving in to a single, honest moment. Her hand came up, gripping his shirt, fingers curling into the fabric. He deepened the kiss, tasting her breath, her warmth, her defiance. The world outside dissolved. The rain, the thunder, the city. Nothing existed but the rhythm of their hearts colliding. He broke away for air, forehead resting against hers, chest rising fast. "You have no idea what you're doing to me," he said hoarsely. She smiled faintly, eyes still closed. "Maybe I do." When he kissed her again, it wasn't hesitant. It was need wrapped in reverence. His hands found her waist, sliding over the silk, tracing the outline of her body with care that felt like worship. The robe loosened, falling slightly as she arched closer. There was nothing rushed, nothing rehearsed, just two souls finally colliding after resisting too long. When she gasped his name, he caught her face between his hands, eyes dark, voice rough. "Tell me to stop." She shook her head slowly. "Don't." And for the first time in his life, Kellen Vance stopped planning and let himself feel. The storm outside had faded into a quiet drizzle, the thunder retreating into the distance like a curtain drawing closed on the world beyond their walls. Inside, the only sound was breath. Deep, unsteady, shared between two bodies pressed close in flickering candlelight. Leora lay beneath him, her silk robe loosened and pooling beneath her. Her skin flushed, hair wild across the pillow they'd stolen from the couch. Her fingertips brushed the curve of his jaw, trailing lightly as if memorizing him by touch alone. Kellen hovered above her, his body trembling, not from exertion, but from the terrifying realization of what had just happened. This hadn't been planned, not managed, not measured. It had happened because he wanted it. He cupped her face gently, drawing his thumb across her cheekbone. Her eyes fluttered open, and for a moment she looked at him like she'd seen this side of him all along, like the man buried beneath the spreadsheets and glass walls had never been hidden from her. Kellen swallowed, voice caught in his throat. "This," he said slowly, reverently, "this is the first thing I've ever wanted without a contract." Leora didn't respond at first. Her lips parted slightly, eyes holding his. There was no sarcasm, no smugness in her expression, only quiet understanding. "I know," she whispered. He closed his eyes briefly, forehead pressing to hers. "Every part of my life has terms, clauses, exit strategies, but you—" He paused, lifting his head to look at her again. "You weren't in the plan." "I didn't ask to be," she replied gently. "I just showed up." He let out a slow breath, almost a laugh, but it caught in his chest. I don't know how to do this. To feel something that doesn't come with control. Her hands slipped around his neck, pulling him closer. Then don't control it, just feel it. That broke something in him, a wall so tightly cemented, he hadn't realized it was choking him from the inside. He kissed her again, not with hunger this time, but with something far more dangerous, sincerity. He didn't care if it made him weak, if it left him exposed. For once, Kellen Vance didn't care what it cost him, because in her arms, in the warmth of her body and the calm of her voice, he felt something he'd never allowed himself to feel before. Free. The room had quieted into a soft, glowing hush. Candles burned low around them, casting flickers across the walls like shadows too tired to dance. The storm outside had fully passed, leaving only the occasional drip from the balcony railing and the low hum of the city trying to wake up beneath them. Leora shifted slightly against him, her cheek resting on his chest, fingers trailing lightly along the curve of his arm. Her breath was slow now, steady, unburdened. Kellen lay still, one arm beneath her, the other wrapped around her waist, hand resting at the small of her back. He hadn't meant to stay. He hadn't even meant to touch her. But now, lying there with her in the candle-lit quiet, walking away felt like the most unnatural thing in the world. Her skin was warm against his, her body soft and grounding. For the first time since childhood, Kellen wasn't alone in the dark. And more than that, he didn't want to be. He glanced down, only to find her eyes closed, lashes curled against her cheeks, her lips parted just slightly as she settled deeper into him. Her robe was bunched loosely around her legs, and one of his shirts, he hadn't even seen her pull it on, hung from her shoulders like it belonged there. He didn't say anything. He didn't dare move. The urge to analyze, to retreat into logic, into familiar armor, was gone. He didn't want to process what this meant. He just wanted to be in it. She murmured something in her sleep, unintelligible, and instinctively. He pulled her closer, his hand sliding up to the curve of her spine. It felt right, not perfect, not orchestrated, just right. He stared at the ceiling for a long while, his mind unusually quiet. The silence wasn't hollow tonight. It didn't echo. It rested. Eventually, his eyes began to close too, and as his body relaxed beneath her weight, he allowed himself the one thing he never granted anyone, not staff, not business partners, not lovers from his past: access. By the time he fell asleep, Leora had melted fully into his chest, her breath sinking with his, and for once, there was no fear, no contract, no plan, just a man holding a woman who made the dark feel like home. The soft orange glow of the morning sun filtered through the penthouse windows, stretching over the floor like a whisper, not daring to disturb what had settled in the dark. The candles had burned themselves down to shallow wax pools, leaving the air faintly scented with vanilla and something new: intimacy. Leora stirred first. Her lashes fluttered as her eyes slowly adjusted to the light. She blinked, then looked down to find Kellen still asleep, one arm firmly around her waist, his chest rising and falling in a rhythm she'd never imagined witnessing. He looked younger in sleep, less carved, less guarded, as if rest had peeled back all the layers he wore during the day. She stayed still for a moment, memorizing the feeling, the way his hand remained steady against her hip, the warmth of his breath at the top of her head, the sound of his heart, slow, steady, human. For a moment, she let herself forget reality, forget that he was Kellen Vance, the man whose name filled business headlines. Forget that she still technically worked here. Forget that there were likely 10 different reasons this would never be simple. She didn't want simple. She just wanted real. As she started to shift, his arm tightened gently around her. Not possessive, just a reflex. She looked up and found his eyes open. He didn't speak. He just watched her. She spoke first. "Did you sleep at all?" He nodded once. "Yeah. You don't usually." He traced her arms slowly, fingers light, his voice a little hoarse. "I did with you." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was warm, suspended between two people who had stepped beyond expectation, beyond fear, and found stillness on the other side. She could have asked what came next. He could have made a speech. But neither did. Instead, he leaned in, brushing her forehead with the gentlest kiss. No pressure, no urgency, just acknowledgement. "Thank you. Stay. I see you." All unsaid, but fully understood. Leora exhaled softly, her head resting against his shoulder once more. She didn't need a label. Not yet. She didn't need him to spell out intentions or declare something he didn't know how to give. She just needed this, and he gave it. As they lay there, wrapped in morning light, neither moved to get up. There were no alarms, no schedules, no interruptions, only a soft promise sealed in silence. Not verbalized, but heard. The sheets beside her were cold. Leora's eyes opened slowly to the morning light filtering across the ceiling. For a brief second, she reached for him instinctively, expecting the weight of his arm, the slow rhythm of his breath. But there was nothing. Her fingers found only rumpled linen and lingering heat already fading. She sat up, the silk robe slipping from her shoulder as she scanned the room. His shirt from the night before still hung on the back of the chair. A glass of water sat untouched on the nightstand, but he was gone. Not in the kitchen, not on the balcony, not even in the study. Silence returned to the penthouse, not the kind that felt tender and warm like it had the night before, but the old kind, cold. Hollow. She wrapped the robe tighter around herself and walked barefoot through the space that had begun to feel familiar. But without him there, every corner felt unfamiliar again. Her eyes drifted to the door, still locked. But he had left. No note. Text. No explanation. She sat at the edge of the long dining table, staring at the place he usually occupied during his morning reports. The chair was still slightly turned from the last time he'd sat in it. She could still feel the press of his lips on her neck, still remember the rasp of his voice when he whispered to her in the dark. But that was hours ago. Now, it was quiet again. She glanced at the clock. 8:12 a.m. It was the kind of morning after that didn't come with clarity, only questions. Did he regret it? Did it mean anything to him? Was she just a slip in his routine? Leora stood, arms wrapped tightly across her stomach, and walked back toward her room. Her footsteps sounded louder today, sharper. When she reached her bed, she paused before sitting, still half hoping the door might open, that he might step back inside and say anything. But it didn't open, and she didn't move, because the one man who made her feel seen had vanished before the sun fully rose. Leora spent the next few hours cleaning rooms that didn't need cleaning. She wiped the counters twice, rearranged the orchid she always tended, organized the silverware drawer until each spoon faced the same way. It wasn't about tidiness, it was about movement, doing something to keep the ache from taking full shape. But nothing worked. The silence now felt louder than before. It wasn't peaceful, it wasn't gentle, it was sharp. And worse, it was familiar. She'd known this kind of vanishing before. People leaving quietly, not saying goodbye, not giving closure. It had happened in foster homes, in friendships, in fleeting relationships that promised more than they delivered. And now, it was happening again. Only this time, it hurt more, because last night hadn't been fleeting, at least not for her. He had held her like she mattered, whispered like she was more than an interruption to his life. He looked at her like she was real, not convenient, not a task. And that kiss, the way he trembled, the way he gripped her like letting go would unmake him. It wasn't just about desire. It had felt like truth. But now, he was gone, and she didn't know whether to be angry or ashamed. Was she foolish to believe she had changed something in him? Had she read too deeply into touches and murmurs spoken in the dark? She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at her phone. No messages, no missed calls. She'd told herself she wasn't expecting one, but she was. Every part of her was waiting for his name to light up the screen, waiting for a knock, a door creak, anything. But the hours kept passing, and with each hour, her doubt grew louder. Maybe she was just a detour in his perfectly charted plan. Maybe he woke up, remembered who he was, and decided she didn't belong in that world after all. Still, she couldn't stop replaying the way he whispered, This is the first thing I've ever wanted without a contract. That wasn't a line. That was a confession. So what changed between night and morning? She lay back slowly, curling her arms around her stomach, eyes focused on the ceiling as dusk began to settle across the glass walls. If it hadn't meant anything, she could have moved on. She'd done it before, but if it had meant everything, and he still walked away, that was a different kind of pain altogether. 3 days. That's how long it took for Kellen to return. Not a message, not a call. Just silence. And then suddenly, the soft mechanical ding of the private elevator at 7:04 on a Monday morning. Leora was in the kitchen placing a new bouquet on the counter, something she didn't even care for, something to fill space. Her hand froze when she heard the door open. Footsteps followed, familiar, controlled, hesitant. She didn't turn. Kellen appeared in the hallway moments later, briefcase in one hand, eyes tired. Tie slightly undone, like he'd thrown himself back together too fast. He stood there, just inside the living room, as if unsure he was welcome in his own home. "Hey," he said quietly. The word hit her like a ripple in still water. It was casual, like nothing had happened, like he hadn't vanished from her bed without a word. She kept her hands busy, adjusting stems, not giving him the satisfaction of her full attention. "You're back." "I am." Silence settled between them again. But this time, it wasn't charged. It was heavy, fractured. He walked toward the counter, slow, every movement calculated, like he didn't trust his own limbs. He started, then stopped. His fingers tapped once against the marble surface. "I needed space." Leora finally turned to look at him. His eyes were darker than usual, rimmed with lack of sleep, shoulders weighed down by something he couldn't name. "You didn't take space," she said. "You disappeared." He nodded once, shame flickering in his eyes. "I know." Her stare didn't soften. "I didn't mean to hurt you," he added, voice lower now. "But you did." The words hung there, bare and undeniable. Kellen looked down, then set the briefcase aside and leaned on the counter with both hands. "I thought if I left, I could sort out what last night meant, make sense of it." "And did you?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice cracked just enough to betray him. "I couldn't stop thinking about it. About you. About how it felt to fall asleep with someone who didn't want anything from me but me." Leora's chest tightened. "I wasn't scared of what happened," he said. "I was scared of how real it felt." He looked at her then, eyes exposed. No CEO armor, no control. "I didn't run because of you, Leora. I ran because I'm not used to this, wanting, needing, hoping." The vulnerability in his tone shook her resolve, but she didn't move toward him, because this time, if they were going to speak their truths, he needed to meet her where she stood. Leora moved around the counter slowly, each step deliberate. Her arms folded across her chest, not for protection but to keep herself steady. Kellen straightened, watching her approach, bracing like a man who already knew what was coming. She stopped a few feet from him, close enough to see the lines beneath his eyes, the faint crease on his brow that hadn't been there 3 days ago. "You left me in your bed," she said quietly. "You held me like I was the first thing that had ever felt right. And then you vanished like it never happened." Kellen opened his mouth, but she cut him off with a sharp shake of her head. "No, don't explain it yet. Just listen." He went still. "I've been invisible in people's lives before, Kellen. Forgotten in rooms I slept in, overlooked by people who said I mattered and then acted like I didn't." Her voice trembled, but she didn't let it break. "But I let you in. And that was a choice I don't make lightly." He swallowed, guilt rising visibly in his throat. "You made me believe that maybe I wasn't just part of the background here, that I wasn't just filling space in your calendar." Her voice cracked then, and then you left. Without a word. He stepped forward. "I didn't know how." "That's not an excuse," she snapped, eyes flaring. "You're a grown man who negotiates billion-dollar deals and runs entire companies, but you couldn't find a way to say, 'I need time.' You couldn't text me." Kellen's voice dropped. "You're right." She shook her head again, tears pressing behind her eyes. "Do you know what that night meant to me?" He looked at her, pained. "It meant everything. Then why did you make me doubt it? His silence said more than words could have. He wasn't proud. He wasn't deflecting. He was wrecked. Leora stepped closer, close enough to feel his breath, but not touching. I'm not asking for your heart on a silver platter, she whispered. I'm asking you not to disappear when things get real. Kellen's jaw flexed, and his eyes finally filled with the thing she'd been waiting to see since the moment he walked back in. Remorse. Not the performative kind. The deep, aching kind. I'm sorry, he said, voice hoarse. For all of it. Her eyes softened slightly. Not forgiving. Not yet. But she nodded once. Then show me you mean it. Don't tell me. Show me. Kellen met her gaze and nodded slowly. And for the first time since that night, the tension between them didn't feel like it was going to break them. It felt like the start of something they might survive, if they were honest enough to keep going. They stood there, toe to toe, the tension between them no longer sharp with anger, but raw with truth. Kellen had never looked so exposed. The man who once measured every word, every movement, now fumbled for air between thoughts. His hands dropped to his sides, then flexed into fists, then opened again as if he couldn't find where to rest them. His gaze dropped to the floor. I wasn't trying to hurt you, he said again, quieter this time. Leora didn't speak. He lifted his head slowly. I left because I panicked. Why? She asked. Because you felt something real. His voice cracked, barely, but enough to make her chest tighten. Because I don't know how to need someone. The confession hung in the air like the final chord of a song, painful, honest, and unfinished. I know how to want things, he continued, stepping back just slightly. Power, control, certainty. But need? That's dangerous. Needing people means depending on them. And depending on people has never worked out for me. He took a breath, running a hand through his hair. My father only noticed me when I performed. My mother walked away without a backward glance. The people I dated never got close enough to matter, because I never let them. Leora's arms lowered. She listened, not interrupting. When I'm in control, I win, he said. In business, in negotiations, that's how I survive. But with you, his voice softened. I couldn't control what I felt. I couldn't fit you into a schedule or a plan. You didn't ask for anything, and somehow you still made me want to give you everything. Her eyes glistened, but she held them steady on him. So yeah, he whispered, I disappeared. Not because I didn't care, but because I cared more than I knew what to do with. And it scared the hell out of me. He finally looked at her then. Every wall stripped away. No title, no steel, no armor. Needing you felt like weakness, he confessed, his voice breaking. But not needing you feels worse. Leora didn't rush to respond. She let the words settle. Let them land. Then she said, simply, needing someone isn't weakness, Kellen. It's what makes us human. He nodded slowly, like he wanted to believe that. Like maybe, finally, he could. Then she held out her hand, not asking him to take it, just offering. And when he stepped forward and took it, her grip was firm. Grounded, because this was what strength looked like. Two people admitting they were terrified, and choosing to stay anyway. The rain had returned by evening, not heavy, just a gentle rhythmic patter against the windows like a steady heartbeat. Leora sat on the plush rug near the low coffee table, legs tucked beneath her, sipping tea she hadn't realized she needed. Her body was still, but her mind churned. Kellen had been quiet since their conversation. No sudden declarations, no more explanations. Just presence. He stood nearby now, pacing slowly behind the couch, his dress shirt unbuttoned at the collar, sleeves rolled up. He wasn't fidgeting. He was just searching for the right way to exist in a space that wasn't built for vulnerability. Finally, he moved toward her. Without a word, he lowered himself onto the rug beside her, shoulders tense, knees bent, resting his arms on his thighs. She didn't look at him immediately. She let the silence breathe. I'm not used to not knowing what to do, he said quietly. You don't have to do anything right now, she replied. Just be here. He looked at her, eyes filled with exhaustion and relief. And then, slowly, like it had cost him something, He shifted, laying his head in her lap. Leora blinked, startled at first by the intimacy of the gesture, but she didn't stop him. Her fingers instinctively lifted, brushing through his hair, gentle and steady. He exhaled deeply, a sound not unlike surrender. No candles, no fire, no seduction, just warmth and stillness. Her palm settled against the side of his face, and she could feel the tightness in his jaw begin to loosen. She wondered how long it had been since anyone touched him like this, with no expectations, no agenda, just kindness. "You always seem so untouchable," she murmured. "I made myself that way," he said, eyes closed, "because it was easier to be admired than known. And now?" she asked softly. "I want to be known," he whispered, "by you." The air between them shifted, not in tension but in truth. It was the kind of closeness that didn't demand anything but honesty, the kind that filled every quiet space without a single kiss. Leora continued to thread her fingers through his hair, and for a long time, neither of them spoke. Outside, the city buzzed with its usual urgency. Inside, time slowed. And there, in her lap, the billionaire who had once controlled every moment of his life let himself rest. Not because he was tired of the world, but because, for the first time, he trusted someone enough to stop holding it up alone. The next morning started slower than usual. Leora had set her alarm earlier than necessary, a habit she hadn't shaken since moving in. But when the soft chime sounded on her phone, her body didn't move. Her limbs felt unusually heavy. A dull ache pulsed behind her eyes, and her stomach turned in slow, queasy waves. She sat up cautiously, one hand pressed to her midsection. The room tilted slightly, not enough to panic, but just enough to make her blink a few extra times before the haze cleared. She got to her feet slowly, breathing through the discomfort. By the time she stepped into the kitchen, the scent of fresh brewed coffee, usually comforting, hit her harder than she expected. She paused mid-step, one hand bracing the counter. Her stomach lurched again, and she shut her eyes until it passed. "Morning," Kellen said, looking up from his tablet. She forced a smile. "Hey." He tilted his head, taking her in. "You okay?" "Yeah, just didn't sleep great." She moved to the fridge, grabbed a bottle of water, and took a slow sip. Probably the weather, but he kept watching her. "You look pale," he said gently. She shrugged. "Didn't eat much yesterday." Kellen frowned slightly, but said nothing more. He turned back to the screen, but his gaze flicked to her again a minute later, subtle but not lost on her. She tried to shake it off, tried to move through her routine as if her body wasn't sending strange signals. But the fatigue didn't fade, and later, while folding fresh towels in the laundry room, she had to sit down for a full minute before standing again. By the afternoon, even walking up the hallway left her winded. She paused by the orchid she usually watered and sat on the arm of the nearby chair, holding her head in her hands. This wasn't normal, not for her. She wasn't the type to get sick. She pushed through headaches, cramps, even emotional storms, but this felt different. Internal, quiet, but persistent, like her body was whispering something she hadn't been ready to hear. She ran a hand over her abdomen, the thought forming at the back of her mind before she was ready to acknowledge it. It couldn't be that, could it? They'd only been together once, just that night, but... Her heart thudded, too loud in her ears. She stood quickly, brushing her palms against her jeans, grounding herself. There was no proof, no test, no certainty, but the idea planted itself, quiet, lingering, and as she turned to walk back down the hall, one hand instinctively drifted to her stomach again. Whatever it was, she couldn't ignore it for long. The evening fell quiet, the kind of quiet Kellen used to find comfort in. But tonight, it wasn't soothing. It felt unfinished. Leora had moved around the penthouse all day slower than usual, quieter than usual, her smile thinner, her voice softer. He noticed. She hadn't said anything was wrong, and she hadn't asked for anything either. That somehow made him worry more. He found her sitting on the balcony, wrapped in one of his gray sweaters, legs folded beneath her, tea untouched on the table beside her. The wind lifted strands of her curls as she stared out at the skyline, lights glittering like jewels too far to touch. He stepped outside. You okay? She looked over her shoulder, offering a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I'm just thinking. He stood beside her for a moment before lowering himself to sit. She hesitated. About what kind of man you're going to be. He tensed slightly, not from offense, but from recognition. She didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. He let the silence hold for a while before he spoke. My father was a master of being present without being there, Kellen said softly. He showed up at events, signed checks, nodded through birthday parties. But I don't remember a single time he looked at me and saw me. Leora stayed quiet, letting him speak at his own pace. When my mother left, it wasn't with a scream or a fight. It was quiet, like she'd been gone long before she walked out the door. She told me once that loving a man who never made space for emotion would eventually drain her dry. His voice caught in his throat, but he pushed through it. I swore I'd never be like him. But somewhere along the way, I became exactly like him. Efficient, strategic, detached. It got me results, but it left no room for this. He gestured gently between them. For you. Leora finally looked at him, eyes calm but direct. You still have a choice, she said. You can be different. He exhaled slowly. I want to be. But I don't know what that looks like. I don't know how to be present without turning everything into a responsibility, without performing love like it's just another boardroom pitch. She shifted closer, her hand finding his. Then start small. Be here. Be honest. Let someone in even when you're scared. He looked down at their hands. I don't want to be a shadow in my child's life someday, he whispered. Or yours. She didn't flinch. And in that moment, she didn't need a promise. She just needed this. A man confronting his past so he wouldn't repeat it, and choosing, slowly, to show up in the now. Leora stood in the bathroom, gripping the sink with one hand, the pregnancy test in the other. Her fingers trembled so much that she could barely keep the stick still enough to read the result. But there it was. Clear, bold, 2 pink lines. She stared at it, her breath caught in her throat, body frozen as 1,000 thoughts collided all at once. Her chest rose in shallow bursts. A part of her had suspected it for days. The fatigue, the nausea, the way. Her senses had sharpened, but confirmation brought a different weight. Not fear, not yet, just reality. She backed away from the sink slowly, lowering herself to sit on the cool edge of the tub. The test lay in her lap, and her eyes never left it. Her hands found her stomach, pressing lightly, almost protectively. This wasn't part of any plan. Not hers, not his. And that's what terrified her most. The tears came quietly, not out of regret, but overwhelm. She hadn't cried like this in years, not from sadness, but from the sheer magnitude of a life changing in one small, irreversible moment. She didn't hear the footsteps, didn't hear the door creak. Leora? Kellen's voice broke the silence, gentle but laced with something between concern and confusion. She looked up, startled, eyes red, the test still in her hand. He paused in the doorway, eyes dropping to the object resting across her thigh. Time slowed. Kellen stepped forward, cautiously, as if entering the moment too quickly might break it. Her voice was barely a whisper. I was going to tell you. I needed a second to understand it myself. He crouched down in front of her, searching her face, then slowly took the test. From her lap, reading it once, then again, as if his eyes were deceiving him. He looked back at her. You're pregnant? She nodded once, tears streaming quietly now. Yes. His mouth parted slightly, but no sound came out. I don't know what you're thinking, she said, and I don't want to assume. He interrupted, not with words, but by setting the test aside gently and cupping her face with both hands. I'm thinking I've never been more scared, he said, but I'm also thinking I've never been more certain of anything. The moment held, 2 people suspended between fear and wonder, and for once, the silence between them didn't demand answers. It gave them room to breathe. The bathroom was quiet, except for their breathing. Leora's shallow, Kellen's uneven. He still knelt in front of her, his hands resting gently on her thighs now, grounding himself in the only thing that felt real. Her. His eyes kept darting between her tear-stained face, and the pregnancy test on the edge of the tub, like his brain was trying to catch up with his heart. It was surreal. The man who spent his life preparing for everything, every outcome, every detail, now sat stunned by something he hadn't predicted. Leora took a shaky breath and wiped her cheek with the back of her hand. "I didn't plan this, Kellen." He nodded. "Neither did I." They looked at each other, everything that had been left unspoken rising between them. "I kept telling myself it was just one night," she continued, her voice tight, "that it wouldn't change anything. But it did," he said softly. She nodded slowly. "It did." He reached for her hands, lacing his fingers with hers. His grip was warm, strong, but not forceful. They sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of possibility resting between them like a fragile glass sphere. Then, without warning, Leora let out a soft laugh. It was shaky, almost tired, but real. "What?" he asked, brow creasing. She gave a small shrug. "I was thinking, if it's a boy, I want to name him Kyle." Kellen blinked. "Kyle?" She nodded, her eyes glossy again. "It means mighty warrior. I don't know. Something about that feels right. Like, whoever he is, he's already strong." His breath caught at the sound of it. Kyle. The name echoed in his chest like a bell rung for the first time. He lowered his head and touched his forehead to their joined hands. "Kyle," he repeated under his breath, as if the sound itself could anchor him. Then he leaned forward and pressed his lips to her knuckles. "I never thought I'd be anyone's father," he said. "But if I get to be his, I want to do it right. I want to deserve that name." She looked at him then, really looked, and something in her chest shifted, not because he had the perfect answer, but because his voice was trembling when he said it. She touched his face. Then, "Stay. Don't run this time." His eyes met hers, and he nodded once. "I'm not going anywhere." He leaned in, pressed his forehead to hers, and exhaled a breath he hadn't known he was holding. Kyle, a name neither of them planned for, but suddenly neither could imagine living without. They sat there in the half-lit bathroom, quiet and unmoving, as if even the walls were waiting for something sacred to unfold. Leora placed his hand gently over her stomach. The moment his palm met her skin, Kellen stilled. There was no movement beneath yet, no kicks, no proof beyond the test and her body's quiet changes. But still, he felt everything. His fingers splayed slightly, as though trying to take in the whole surface of her abdomen. A low breath slipped from his lips. "I used to think legacy was buildings, patents, company shares," he murmured. "Things that last longer than me." He swallowed hard. "But this," his voice cracked. "This is different." Leora's hand covered his, grounding him. He leaned forward slowly until his forehead pressed gently against her belly. The contact was intimate, reverent, like a prayer he didn't know how to speak out loud. "I don't know how to be a father," he whispered, voice raw. "I barely remember having one." Leora stroked his hair, tender and steady. "But I swear, I won't disappear. I won't be absent in the room. I'll show up, even when I don't know what I'm doing. I'll show up every time." His shoulders shook once, and she felt it. He was breaking in her arms, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of feeling something real, something uncontainable. He kissed her belly then, soft, intentional. One kiss, then another. It wasn't ceremonial. It was him letting go of every blueprint he'd clung to. "I love you," he said suddenly, without looking up. "Not just because of this baby. I need you to know that. I loved you before I had the courage to name it." Leora blinked fast, heart thundering against her ribs. "Kellen." He looked up at her finally, eyes wet, no hesitation in his face. "I don't want a plan," he said. "I want a life. With you. With him. With whatever comes." Her throat tightened as she cupped his face in both hands. "You have me," she whispered. "You've had me." Another tear slipped down his cheek, and this time he didn't hide it. He leaned into her touch, resting his face against her stomach again, holding her close like she was both his present and his redemption. And in that stillness, where tears met trembling smiles. They stopped being afraid of what they couldn't control and started trusting what they could build together. The next morning, sunlight pushed gently through the windows, unfiltered, golden, and warmer than usual. It lit the room like a quiet promise, softening the edges of a world that had changed overnight. Leora was curled on the couch, Kellen beside her, their legs tangled under a shared throw blanket. Between them sat a small plate of fruit she barely touched, and a glass of water he kept refilling without being asked. No one had spoken much yet. There was nothing urgent to say. They were just there. He turned toward her after a long moment. "We don't have to decide everything right now." She nodded slowly. "I know. No contracts, no timelines, no fixed expectations," he continued. "We just figure it out, one step at a time." Leora looked at him, tilting her head slightly. "You sure you're okay with that?" Kellen's lips curled faintly. "No, but I'm willing." She smiled for the first time that day, small but real. "I was raised on uncertainty," she said. "I've spent most of my life surviving what I didn't see coming. But this..." She touched her stomach lightly, then glanced at him. "This doesn't feel like survival. It feels like something we get to build together." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, rubbing his palms slowly together. "I keep thinking back to how I used to plan every move, every investment, every exit. But nothing about you, about this, fits any of that. And weirdly, that's what makes it feel right." She reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his. "We don't need to know every detail," she said. "We just need to show up." He nodded slowly. No control, no performance, just presence. They sat in that agreement, wrapped in shared stillness, the sound of the city far below them offering its usual hum. But this time, it didn't feel distant or cold. It felt manageable. Kellen turned toward her again, voice softer now. "Whatever this baby needs, whatever you need, I want to be part of that." Fully, her gaze lingered on his face. "Then don't overthink it. Just stay close." "I can do that," he said. "No spreadsheets required." She laughed, and the sound made him close his eyes for a beat, as if sealing it inside his memory. They weren't rushing. They weren't mapping a future. They were choosing each other, moment by moment. And for the first time, that was more than enough. The air inside the bedroom was still. No candles, no storm, just the sound of steady breathing and the occasional rustle of fabric against skin. Leora stood by the window, wrapped in one of Kellen's black tees, her bare legs lit softly by the golden hour spilling in from Manhattan's skyline. The city below buzzed, but the room above it pulsed with something quieter, deeper. She felt him behind her before he touched her. His arms circled her waist gently, hands settling low across her stomach. She leaned back against his chest, and for a long moment, neither of them said a word. He whispered into the side of her neck, "I've never wanted to protect anything the way I want to protect you." Her breath caught. She turned slowly in his arms, looking up into his face. His jaw was relaxed, but his eyes were wide, open in a way that made her feel completely known, completely wanted. She lifted her hand and traced the edge of his brow down the curve of his cheek, her fingers lingering against his lips. "I'm scared," she admitted. "So am I," he replied. "But I've never felt safer than I do with you." Kellen bent down, kissing her forehead first, then the tip of her nose, before resting his lips gently against hers. There was no urgency, just softness, reverence, the kind of kiss that said you matter without needing to speak it. She brought her hands to the buttons of his shirt, slowly undoing them. One by one, he let her. He guided her backward until the backs of her legs touched the bed. Then she sat, pulled him down with her, and they melted into the sheets like a secret only the two of them knew how to keep. His touch was different this time, more deliberate, more tender. No rush, no dominance, just shared devotion. He kissed along her stomach, pausing when she shivered beneath his lips. One hand rested protectively just beneath her navel, while the other curled around her thigh, steadying her. She exhaled his name, not as a plea, but as a truth. Kellen rose over her, their eyes locked, hands intertwined above her head. "I won't break you," he said. "You don't have to say that. she replied. He leaned in closer, his mouth brushing hers again. I'm not saying it for you. I'm saying it for me. They moved together in rhythm, not in pursuit of pleasure alone, but in affirmation, of trust, in response to everything they had unlearned just to get here. When she gasped and tightened around him, he whispered against her skin, "Ours." And when they finally stilled, sweat-kissed and breathless, he cradled her close, palm over her stomach, their future between them. 3 days after Leora's pregnancy was confirmed, Kellen's entire calendar looked unrecognizable. Meetings were shuffled. One board presentation was pushed to Zoom. 2 interviews were postponed. And his assistant, Daphne, who had never once questioned his tightly wound itinerary, blinked twice when she noticed he'd blocked out a full 3 hours for a private appointment in the middle of a Wednesday morning. "Kellen?" she asked, brow furrowed. "Do you want me to reschedule this executive lunch with Lions Global?" "No," he said, slipping his phone into his pocket. "Just move it to next week. And the investor call? I'll join from the car if needed." Daphne blinked again, but nodded. "Very well, sir." He didn't elaborate, because for the first time in his career, nothing mattered more than the quiet woman sitting beside him in the waiting room of Dr. Ramirez's OBGYN clinic. The moment he and Leora stepped into that small space, mint green walls, calming paintings, the faint scent of hand sanitizer and fresh paper, Kellen felt something shift inside him again. This wasn't a penthouse. This wasn't a boardroom. There were no contracts here, no quarterly goals. Just soft murmurs of women discussing blood pressure, receptionists confirming insurance, and the gentle anticipation of futures growing quietly inside bodies that were doing the extraordinary. He looked at Leora as she filled out the intake forms. Her curls were tied up, her face bare, her lips pulled into a nervous smile. She didn't look fragile. She looked focused, and he was in awe of her. "You good?" he asked, his hand brushing hers. She nodded, pressing the clipboard back to the receptionist. "Yeah, just feels real now. It is real," he whispered. When the nurse called her name, he stood without hesitation. The nurse blinked. "Are you the—" "Yes," he answered, no falter in his tone. "I'm with her." Inside the exam room, Kellen sat close, hand clasped in Leora's as the ultrasound gel was applied to her belly. His pulse thundered as the wand moved, and then, there it was. A flicker, a sound, steady, rapid, alive. The heartbeat. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Leora's eyes welled with tears, and Kellen leaned down, pressing his lips to her temple. "I've closed billion-dollar deals," he whispered, voice shaking. "But this is the only sound I never want to stop hearing." She gripped his hand tighter, their future echoing from the small screen in front of them. And in that moment, everything else, money, power, reputation, faded. Because nothing meant more than this heartbeat. The master bedroom was always closed off, Kellen's sanctuary behind frosted oak doors that no one entered without reason. Even Leora, despite living in the penthouse for months, had never stepped foot inside. Until tonight, the night after their first prenatal appointment, she stood in the hallway, holding a folded stack of pajamas, barefoot, heart thudding in her chest. The door was open. She hadn't opened it. Kellen had. He leaned against the doorframe, his sleeves rolled up, the warm amber of the hallway casting a halo across his jaw. He didn't speak at first, just watched her with that familiar gaze that always seemed to see more than she was ready to reveal. "You sure?" she asked, her voice soft. He stepped aside, hand brushing lightly against her lower back as he nodded. "You're not just part of my life anymore, Leora. You are it." Inside, the room didn't look like a billionaire's castle. It looked like minimalist, understated, masculine grays and dark woods, shelves of rare books, a single black and white photo of the Manhattan skyline on the far wall. But there was space now. One side of the king-sized bed had been cleared, her favorite pillow already resting there. A small antique reading lamp had replaced the sleek chrome one, and on the nightstand, her prenatal vitamins. She stared. "You memorized the list," she murmured, touched. "I watched you Google them 5 times before you bought them," he said with a crooked smile. Didn't want to get it wrong. Leora turned to him, eyes glistening. You've changed. No, he said, walking closer. You're changing me. She stepped into his arms slowly. The weight of her body fit into his chest like a missing puzzle piece. No resistance, no performance, just breath and body, and a safety she'd never known. I don't want to be a burden, she whispered into his shirt. You're my beginning, he murmured back. That night, they didn't rush toward lust or need. They lay on the bed fully clothed, limbs tangled, breath synchronizing. Kellen read aloud from her favorite book, his voice low and steady, while her fingers danced idly over the skin of his forearm. And when she fell asleep, belly soft between them, he didn't move. He just stayed there, wide awake and silent, watching her chest rise and fall, protecting her, guarding their quiet corner of peace. The master bedroom was no longer just his. It was theirs. And from that night on, it would always smell like lavender, sound like laughter, and hold the rhythm of two people rewriting legacy, with no contracts, no expectations, just heartbeats. Leora sat curled on the wide windowsill in the master bedroom, her palms cradling the slow swell of her belly as snow began to trace delicate whispers against the glass. The city stretched beyond the penthouse, glittering in its December hush. Behind her, Kellen paced, not out of restlessness, but nervous calculation. She could feel him rehearsing something. He stopped abruptly. Leora, he began, voice tight. I want to talk to you about something. She turned slowly, eyeing the velvet box in his hand. Her breath caught. But when he opened it, it wasn't a ring inside. Instead, it was a custom-designed pendant, a sleek, carved figure-8 symbol, its edges wrapped in onyx and gold, a fusion of eternal motion and grounded strength. He knelt, not proposing in the traditional sense but offering something else, something calculated. This is a partnership agreement, he said quietly, holding up a second embossed folder. I don't want to rush into something we might not be ready for, but I want to raise this child with you, build a life that honors your independence and mine. Co-parents, business partners, co-heads of the estate. Leora blinked. You want to draw up terms? He nodded slowly. No legal loopholes, no gray areas. You'll have equal ownership of every property I own, should you choose. Full rights as Kyle's guardian. Your creative work will be housed under my foundation. You won't just be protected, you'll be empowered. It was the most Kellen thing she'd ever heard. Structured, generous, and emotionally distant all at once. Her silence stretched until she finally rose from the sill, her robe falling over her curves, her expression unreadable. So, no ring, she said. He froze. No vow, she added. No public commitment, just shared documents and good intentions. Kellen's voice cracked for the first time. I don't want to fail you the way I watched my father fail my mother. I thought this might be safer. Leora walked toward him slowly, her eyes like firelight. You say it's not about fear, but that's all I see. Fear that I'll ask for all of you. Fear that I'll leave. But Kellen, I'm already here. She took the pendant gently, but didn't put it on. This is beautiful, she said. But if I carry your child and share your bed, then I'm not just the woman you want. I'm the woman you choose. The weight of her words left the room still. And for the first time in his life, Kellen Vance realized that power didn't come from control. It came from surrender. The penthouse was quiet, too quiet for the tension humming between them. Kellen stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows, his reflection etched in the glass like a question mark. The city below pulsed with life, but up here, time had paused. Leora sat at the edge of the leather sectional, one hand curled protectively around her small bump. Her robe barely concealed the tremble in her shoulders. The silence between them had grown so loud, it was deafening. I wasn't trying to insult you, Kellen said at last, his voice low, almost ashamed. I thought I was offering something stable, real. She turned slowly, her eyes piercing through him. A co-parenting partnership, a contract of care. Her voice was calm, but the storm behind it was brewing. You offered me a business model, Kellen, not a life. His jaw tensed. It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that. He walked toward her, but she stood before he could get too close. Her bare feet on the marble, her voice rising like a wave crashing against years of being diminished, overlooked, halfway loved. I'm not your assistant, not your maid, not a placeholder for what you think. Love might look like someday, she said, tears pooling but refusing to fall. If I carry your child and share your bed, then I'm not just the woman you want. I'm the woman you choose. Kellen looked wrecked. The air left his lungs as though her words struck something deeper than guilt. Shame. It wasn't about what he'd said. It was what he hadn't dared feel. Until now. I don't know how to be what you deserve, he admitted, his voice cracking. But I know what you are. You're the woman I would have built an empire for if I'd met you sooner. And now, I just want to build one with you. Leora shook her head gently, painfully. I don't want to be part of your empire, Kellen. I want to be part of your heart. He took a step forward. Then show me how. Teach me what choosing you looks like, Leora. Because I want to learn. A long breath fell from her lips. She didn't speak, didn't move, not at first. But after a heartbeat, or 10, she reached for his hand and placed it on her belly. Start here, she whispered, and don't disappear when it gets hard. His lips trembled against her forehead. Never again. Outside, the snow started falling again, soft, slow, uncertain. But inside, something fragile was growing, not just trust, but truth. And it began not with a kiss, but a choice. The energy inside Vance and CO's Manhattan boardroom was sharp, all stainless steel and focused eyes. Quarterly projections were up, the Dubai expansion was greenlit, and the numbers made investors purr. But Kellen, he was distracted, not in the absent-minded, CEO too busy way. No, this was different. He sat quieter, softer. He let Silas lead the numbers. He actually listened. A few board members exchanged glances, surprised by his uncharacteristic calm. Across the room, Xavier clocked everything. After the meeting adjourned, Kellen lingered at the head of the long obsidian table, skimming something on his phone, likely a calendar, maybe a baby app. He looked up just in time to catch Xavier's gaze narrowing. You got a minute? Xavier asked. Kellen nodded, rising to follow him down the corridor into his private office. The door clicked shut. Xavier turned, arms crossed. You've changed. Kellen raised a brow. That obvious? Only to those who know you before she did. There was no malice in the way he said it. Just a warning wrapped in brotherhood. Kellen exhaled, unbuttoning the top of his shirt. She's pregnant. Xavier's brows shot up, then settled. Congratulations. I guess that explains why your hard edge's been sanded. I've been trying not to be my father, Kellen confessed. Turns out avoiding him made me more like him. Xavier leaned back against the edge of his desk. That woman, Leora, she doesn't want your walls. She wants what's behind them. And if you keep dodging intimacy by offering plans instead of presents. He let the warning hang in the air. I know, Kellen murmured. I already screwed up once. Then don't screw it up again. You've got a second chance most men don't get. Xavier stepped forward, hand on Kellen's shoulder. You keep acting like love is a risk. It's not. Losing her is... There was a long beat of silence. Kellen nodded slowly. She said something to me the other night. If I share your bed and carry your child, then I'm not just the woman you want. I'm the woman you choose. Xavier let out a low whistle. Damn, that's a woman who knows her worth. And I'm just starting to know mine because of her, Kellen admitted. I'm learning, Zay. Day by day. Xavier clasped his shoulder tighter. Then keep showing up. Not for the company. For them. As Kellen walked out, a message popped on his phone. Leora had her prenatal yoga class canceled due to weather. He sent back just 2 words. Come home. Xavier watched him go and smiled to himself. The wolf had finally found something worth being gentle for. Months passed. The snow hit Manhattan like a whispered secret, dusting the city in. Soft white as traffic lights glowed, muted red through the flurries. Inside the steel and glass skyscraper of Reed and Vance Global, Kellen stood at the head of a 30-person boardroom. the walls lined with LED projections of quarterly reports and market trends. He wore the power like armor. Charcoal suit crisp, voice clipped, commanding. Slide 34 projects a 12% yield with the supply chain, restructured in. His phone vibrated once in his breast pocket. He ignored it, then again. Again. Xavier leaned forward from his seat, eyes wide. Kellen paused. The phone buzzed once more, and this time he fished it out, eyes narrowing at the name flashing on the screen. Zoe, Leora's midwife. A beat of silence. Then everything inside him dropped. He didn't even excuse himself. The boardroom door swung wide and hit the wall with a thud as he bolted. Through it, phone to his ear, already sprinting down the hallway. His voice cracked as he answered. Is she okay? Is she? Zoe, talk to me. She's in early active labor. It started suddenly. We're heading to Mount Sinai. She's asking for you, Kellen. He didn't hear the rest. His heartbeat was a freight train in his chest. He reached the elevator, cursed at the slowness, then turned and took the stairs 3 at a time, his polished shoes slipping once on the metal edge. His driver barely had the car running before Kellen yanked open the back door. Skip the lights if you have to. I need to get to Mount Sinai. Now. Snowflakes pelted the windshield as they surged through traffic. Kellen's hands trembled in his lap, not from fear, from the sheer, indescribable weight of what was happening. Leora, their baby. Today, the penthouse felt like another lifetime, the boardroom a different man's life. When he arrived at the hospital, he didn't wait for the sliding doors to finish opening. Leora Vance, she was just brought in. The nurse at the front desk stood, recognizing his face from the news. She's upstairs, 2nd floor, maternity, room 204. He ran, not walked, not strode. He pushed open the door just as Leora doubled over in pain, sweat dotting her brow. Zoe at her side, coaching her through breathing. Kellen's heart shattered at the sight of her. She looked up through the haze and saw him, and broke into tears. You came, she whispered. Of course I came, he breathed, dropping everything, his coat, his control, his fear. He rushed to her, kissed her forehead, grabbed her hand. I'm here. I'm not leaving. Zoe smiled. Good, because this baby's not waiting for anyone. He nodded through tears. Neither am I. He had never felt more out of control, and never more certain. He wasn't just a man in love. He was about to become a father. Outside the hospital window, the snow fell slow and steady, no longer a whisper, but a lullaby. It blanketed the city in white, muffling car horns and the rumble of taxis as the world outside paused. But inside room 204, everything raced. Leora was curled on her side, gripping Kellen's hand like it was the only anchor she had. Her hair clung to her temples, face flushed, jaw clenched through each wave of contraction. Beads of sweat shimmered on her collarbone, her breaths coming short and shallow. Try to rest between contractions, Zoe urged gently from her position at the foot of the bed. Rest was impossible. The pain surged in intervals, but what overwhelmed her most wasn't the physical. It was the reality. She was about to become a mother. And Kellen hadn't let go of her once. He sat on the edge of the bed, legs spread, one hand stroking her back, the other still gripped tightly in hers. His suit jacket was long gone. His sleeves rolled. He had dark circles under his eyes, not from exhaustion, but from sheer intensity. He hadn't blinked much since he'd walked in. I hate you right now, she panted between clenched teeth. I deserve that, he whispered, brushing a kiss against her temple. I'm serious. I want to strangle you. I'll hold still for it. Just after he's born, despite everything, a broken laugh escaped her. Another contraction hit, this one sharper, deeper. Her nails dug into his forearm. I can't. Kellen, I can't. Yes, you can, he said fiercely. You are. You're doing it. You're the strongest woman I've ever known. A nurse peeked in and checked the monitors. You're progressing beautifully, Leora. Baby's heart rate is strong. Just a little longer now. Kellen glanced outside. The snow swirled like something cinematic. like the city itself was holding its breath. He never liked hospitals. They always reminded him of his mother's quiet decline, of sterile rooms and final words and hollow goodbyes. But this was different. This room was filled with life, raw, painful, terrifying life, and for the first time, he wasn't trying to fix or manage or control it. He was just here, fully. Leora groaned, shifting as another wave crashed into her body. Her fingers trembled in his grasp. Kellen pressed his lips to her knuckles. You don't have to do it alone. I'm here, Leora. Not as your CEO, not as your project. Her lashes fluttered open. I'm yours, he said softly. I'm this child's. We're a family. No conditions. She looked at him, really looked at him, and in that moment, between pain and peace, a tear slipped from the corner of her eye. Not from fear, but from the unbearable beauty of truth. Outside, snow dusted the window glass. Inside, love held her hand. The room was quiet, too quiet. And then, a sound split the silence. A cry, not loud, not sharp, but piercing enough to shatter the weight of every fear, every wall, every ache that had ever stood between Kellen and the one thing he never knew he needed. Until now. Leora collapsed back against the pillows, gasping, eyes wide and wet as her body trembled with exhaustion. But through her blurred vision, she saw it. Saw him, their son. The nurse handed the tiny swaddled baby to Zoe first, who inspected his, breathing and vitals, murmuring in awe at how strong his lungs were. He's perfect, Zoe whispered. Absolutely perfect. Kellen stood frozen, motionless, until Leora reached for his hand and rasped, Go on. It was like she'd spoken magic into him. Kellen stepped forward slowly, his breath caught in his chest. His fingers curled at his sides like he wasn't sure if he had the right to touch this moment. And then, Zoe placed Kyle in his arms. Everything inside Kellen stilled. He had held awards, assets, contracts worth billions. But nothing had ever weighed so much or meant so much. Kyle was warm, so small. His face was wrinkled and pink and utterly unbothered, even in his wailing. And yet Kellen could barely breathe. He looked down at this tiny, fierce miracle, his son, and felt his soul rearrange. All those years spent climbing ladders that reached nowhere, all those months trying to silence his heart, all those weeks pretending he didn't care, gone. I thought legacy meant building an empire, he whispered, voice cracking. His thumb brushed gently against Kyle's cheek, and the baby's cries slowed as if he heard and recognized him. But it's you, Kellen said. You're the only legacy I care about now. Behind him, Leora covered her mouth. Her body ached, her heart stretched, and the sight of Kellen, her once guarded, stubborn, unreachable CEO, standing barefoot on the hospital floor, tears in his eyes, a newborn in his arms, whispering vows with his soul. It undid her, completely. A nurse offered to take Kyle back for cleaning and assessment, but Kellen shook his head. Just a minute more, he pleaded. Please. He turned to Leora, and in that look, there was everything. Every apology he hadn't said, every moment he should have chosen her sooner, every promise he was still learning how to make. Leora stretched a weak arm out, touching Kyle's blanket, her fingers brushing Kellen's. 3 hands. 1 circle. A family, imperfect maybe, but real, unbreakable. Leora hadn't meant to listen. She'd been half asleep, her body wrecked from the intensity of labor. Her mind swimming between dreams and the steady hum of machines. The pain had dulled, but her heart throbbed from something else entirely. Uncertainty. She knew Kellen cared, but did he love her? Not as a project, not as a responsibility, but her, fully, vulnerably, honestly. That question had clung to her even after Kyle's first cry. Until now, she stirred faintly beneath the blanket as the soft shuffle of Kellen's voice drifted across the dim room. A curtain hung slightly ajar, just enough for his words to bleed through. He didn't know she could hear. I was afraid, he said quietly. The rhythm of his voice was different now, unarmored. I thought, If I let myself want something this real, it would be taken from me, or I'd ruin it. She heard the creak of the rocking chair and Kyle's tiny coo in response. But he came anyway, Kellen continued, awe in his voice. Despite every wall I built, every mistake I made, he came, and so did she. Leora pressed her palm to her mouth. She didn't come for money or shelter, Kellen whispered. She came with strength, with grace, with fire I didn't deserve, and love I didn't know how to hold. He paused. Then came the softest sound, his lips brushing their son's forehead. You saved me, Kyle. You and your mama. And then came the words that pierced Leora like no other. I don't want to run anymore. I just want to be hers, completely. If she'll still have me. Leora broke. Tears spilled, hot and unfiltered, down her cheeks. Not from sadness, but from relief, from release, from finally hearing what her heart had waited for. This wasn't a grand gesture made on some rooftop or red carpet. No diamond ring. No press release. Just a man in a dark hospital room, holding the child they created from raw, unspoken love. Finally brave enough to speak the truth. She tried to wipe her eyes, but the sobs came before she could stop them. Kellen turned sharply. Leora? She blinked up at him, unable to hide the tears now streaming freely. You heard? He asked, voice shaky. She nodded. Every word. And then, without hesitation, he brought Kyle to her. No walls, no pretense. Leora kissed their son's forehead, then looked up into Kellen's eyes, clear, unguarded, asking nothing but honesty. I still want you, she whispered. But this time, I need all of you. Kellen exhaled like a man finally breathing for the first time in his life. And then, he kissed her, soft, certain, forever. The rain tapped gently against the tall windows of the penthouse. No longer a cold, sterile fortress of marble and minimalism, but now a home pulsing with light, warmth, and life. The walls had softened. So had Kellen. Sunflowers peeked from blue glass vases. Crayon drawings, Kyle's proud early scribbles, were framed beside sleek black and white photography. And in the center of it all, beneath an arch of soft blue balloons, stood a small cake with one gold candle. The number 1. His first year. Their first year. Together. Leora moved around the room with a smile that hadn't left her face all morning. Her curls were tucked in a soft bun, a smear of frosting on her cheek as she arranged the last of the gift bags, mostly books, puzzles, and little wooden animals she insisted were developmental. Kellen had wanted to buy the entire toy section of Manhattan. Leora had narrowed it to things Kyle would use, not just own. Kyle, meanwhile, was in the middle of it all, sitting happily in the middle of a giant foam mat, chubby fingers gripping a stuffed fox. He gurgled with delight when the music box played again, swaying with the rhythm. He was happy, whole, safe. Leora crouched beside him, kissing his temple. You're one today, little light. Kyle's big brown eyes blinked up at her, then looked around as if expecting applause. And sure enough, from behind them, is it time? Kellen's voice carried across the room, laced with wonder and pride. He stepped in from the kitchen holding a tiny gold crown, a soft felt one, embroidered with Kyle in neat white thread. Leora laughed. You actually did it. I had it custom made. No son of mine is celebrating in a paper hat. Kyle squealed as his father gently lowered the crown onto his curls, then scooped him into his arms like he was holding the universe. Leora watched, a knot forming in her throat. Not sadness, but awe. This man, once rigid, unreadable, was now someone who celebrated a child with messy kisses and hand-made crowns. And this child, born of no plan but all the right chaos, had reshaped every corner of their lives. Their family wasn't accidental. It was divine timing. The candle flickered. Kellen leaned in. Make a wish, champ. But Leora already had one, and he was holding it in his arms. Once a cold monument to wealth, the Reed penthouse had transformed into a sanctuary of soul. The sterile silver surfaces had been softened with woven baskets filled with wooden blocks, books in joyful chaos, and walls that now told stories beyond spreadsheets and stock tickers. The sharp echoes of loneliness had vanished. In their place, laughter, the soft shuffle of Kyl's crawling across hardwood floors, Leora's voice humming while folding onesies, and Kellen now, always barefoot by choice, his dress shirts traded for soft cotton tees with spit up on the shoulders and pride in his eyes. On the far wall of the living room, a new gallery had taken shape. Family photos, unfiltered and unposed, Kellen holding Kyle after his first bath, hair plastered to his forehead. Leora asleep on the couch, Kyle on her chest, Kellen's hand resting protectively over them both. A black and white print of their first ultrasound, 2 faint lines in a haze of gray. In the corner, a plush velvet reading nook had been carved into what once was a space for expensive art. Now, a space for bedtime stories. Leora had insisted it face the window. There's something healing about watching rain fall when you're safe inside, she'd told. Kellen once, curled into his side, the scent of Kyl's lotion lingering in the air. Kellen had agreed, without words, just with a kiss to her forehead. Now, on Kyl's birthday, the rain fell like a benediction, soft, cleansing, tender. Near the fireplace, a bassinet had been replaced with a large toy chest, its lid open and overflowing, not just with things, but with meaning. Wooden animals hand-carved from Ethiopia, a musical globe that played lullabies from around the world. Kellen had commissioned a local artisan to create a mobile of stars, planets, and one tiny paper moon with Kyle etched in gold. In the kitchen, a framed note in Leora's handwriting sat near the coffee machine. Today is a good day to begin again. That was the energy of the home now. Not perfection, not pretense, but presence, partnership, parenthood. Kyle crawled toward his music box, giggling, and behind him, Kellen watched with a reverence usually reserved for cathedrals. "Do you see this?" he whispered to Leora, who just joined him. She looked around, hand resting gently on his chest. "I don't just see it," she said softly. "I built it with you." The penthouse had quieted, save for the faint patter of rain against the windows, and the lull of a vinyl record spinning something slow and timeless. Kyle had finally drifted to sleep after his first birthday cake, face smeared in banana frosting, curls damp with the effort of joy. Kellen stood in the center of the living room, a soft grin pulling at the edges of his mouth. He held out his hand. "Mrs." He stopped himself, corrected with a playful reverence. "Leora." She turned from dimming the lights, barefoot, curls cascading over her silk robe, her skin aglow in the amber evening. "Hmm?" she asked, eyes warm, amused. "Dance with me," he whispered, palm still open, patient. Leora chuckled. "To what?" "There's no beat." "There's us," Kellen said. "That's the rhythm I want." She slid into his arms like water returning to the sea. No choreography, just closeness. Her head rested against his chest, and she could feel the change in his heartbeat as his fingers curled lightly around her waist. His touch no longer carried tension, just gratitude. "You're not checking your phone," she murmured. "Do you know," he whispered, "I used to measure success by silence?" She lifted her head, curious. "The quieter my phone was," he said, "the more I'd panic. Now?" His voice dipped lower. "Now I crave quiet if it means you're near." They swayed slowly, barely moving, just enough to make the moment feel eternal. Outside the city twinkled, but inside it was just them. The photograph wall looked on like a quiet witness. The record spun. The rain whispered its steady hymn. And Kyle's tiny breaths floated from the baby monitor beside them. "I used to think love was a distraction," Kellen said, pressing his forehead to hers. "And now it's the only reason anything I do means something." Leora kissed his collarbone. "I waited a long time," she whispered, "to be seen like this." "You were never invisible to me," he replied. "I just hadn't learned how to stop looking through you and start looking at you." They didn't need candles or chandeliers. They had the storm outside and the warmth within. They danced until the song ended, and still, they held on. Later that night, after Kyle was tucked in and the rain deepened into a lullaby, Leora stepped out of the steamy shower and into the dim bedroom lit only by amber sconces and the quiet glow of the city through the sheer curtains. Kellen sat at the edge of their bed, shirt unbuttoned, head bowed like a man praying to something he couldn't name. He looked up when she entered. She wore nothing but a soft robe and the scent of lavender. Her body was fuller now, curved by motherhood and love, and to him, more sacred than ever. "Come here," he said, voice low, reverent. She crossed the room slowly. Kellen reached up, fingers ghosting over the stretch marks on her hips, the softness of her belly, the curve of her breast. Not with lust first, but awe. "I used to crave perfection," he said, lifting her hand to his lips. "Now I crave everything real." Leora touched his jaw. "Then, let's be real." He stood, kissed her slowly. No rush, no hunger, just depth, just time. He undressed her without words, without urgency, as though revealing a masterpiece hidden behind velvet. He whispered her name into her shoulder, her throat, the hollow of her collarbone. And when she lay back, he followed, not above, not commanding, but beside her. They moved together like a promise being remade, a dance they'd learned after breaking and rebuilding. Their breaths synced. His hand slid down her spine as he murmured truths against her skin, how he had memorized the sound of her laughter, how he woke just to watch her hold Kyle, how he no longer feared stillness because it meant she was near. Leora arched into him, kissed his jaw, cradled his cheek, and when she whispered, "I trust you," he shattered in the best way. After, they stayed wrapped in the warmth of shared silence, limbs tangled, her head on his chest. Kellen kissed the crown of her head. "You didn't just survive me," he whispered. "You saved me." Leora looked up. "We saved each other." Outside, the storm quieted. Inside, they had finally come home. Morning arrived slowly, slipping through the fogged penthouse windows like honey. Kyle babbled softly in his crib, the steady rhythm of rain still pattering against the glass. Leora sat curled on the velvet chaise, robe tied loosely, mug of herbal tea warming her hands. Kellen appeared behind her, freshly shaved, sleeves rolled up, holding something small in his palm. "Happy first Kyle Day," he said, kissing her shoulder. "And happy you day too. You did everything." She smiled, lifting her brow. "What's in your hand?" He knelt before her, the way he had the first time he asked her to stay, but this time without tension, without expectation. This time, he was already home. "I bought something," he said, but not because it was logical or strategic or even necessary. He opened his hand, a silver key, aged around the edges. It hung on a leather cord, not a diamond chain. Simple, worn, honest. Leora's eyes flickered with confusion, then softened as she stared at it. "It's a lake house," Kellen explained. "Upstate, quiet, no press, no meetings, no spreadsheets, just woods and water and us." He pressed the key into her hand. "I had it redone. For you, for KL. There's a porch swing and a room filled with books you love. There's nothing in your name, no contracts, no fine print." She blinked slowly, the weight of his words breaking over her like sunlight after a storm. Kellen took her free hand. "I spent half my life trying to own everything, fix everything, control everything. But you," his voice cracked, "you showed me that love isn't a project. It's surrender." Tears slid silently down her cheek. "You're not just the mother of my son," he whispered. "You're the woman I'd build a world around." She leaned in, kissed him deeply, not with urgency, but with acceptance. Her fingers closed around the key, her heart around the truth. Their home wasn't built in skyscrapers or boardrooms. It was built in that moment, on a swing by a lake, in the quiet between confessions, in the arms of a man who finally chose love without conditions. Night had wrapped itself around the city like a lullaby. Kyle was tucked in, his tiny hand curled beside his cheek, breath rising and falling in the rhythm of dreams. The penthouse was quiet, no longer cold, no longer cavernous, but filled with warmth that had nothing to do with light. Leora stood at the window, robe drawn snug, watching the rain streak down the glass like poetry. Her reflection shimmered beside the skyline. Behind her, Kellen approached with the kind of silence that meant reverence, not caution. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, one hand resting over her heart, the other over her waist. She leaned into him, letting his body shield hers, as if he had finally become her safest place. The window fogged around their breath. In the distance, thunder rolled, soft and steady. Kellen spoke, his voice low, barely above a murmur. I used to think legacy was about the company, the money, the last name. He kissed the crown of her head. But you gave me something no contract ever could. Leora turned to face him, her gaze holding his. Her love was no longer cautious. It was rooted, confident, whole. Kellen traced her jawline gently, pausing at her lips. You didn't just change my life, he whispered. You made it worth living. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't cry. She smiled instead, because she believed him now. Fully, finally, he led her back to bed. Not out of desire, but reverence. They curled beneath the covers, limbs tangled, hearts synced. Not everything needed words anymore. Some love spoke in the silence, in the storm, in the steady drum of Kyle's heartbeat echoing from the monitor beside the bed. They didn't need a ceremony. They didn't need a headline. They had everything, and it had all begun with a key, a second chance, and two hearts brave enough to unlock each other. Have you ever loved someone so deeply it changed the way they saw the world, maybe even the way they saw themselves? If Kellen and Leora's journey moved your heart, tell us, would you fight for love? If it finally felt like home, drop your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share for more stories where love doesn't just happen, it transforms. AE.